Understanding music is hard. To my credit, I have had an above average amount of experience playing music. I was a percussionist in several types of bands for almost 10 years, and have watched enough YouTube music theory videos to at least sound like I know what I'm talking about, most of the time. At the start of the year, I made the decision to take some music electives for university, both to have a break from my never-ending computing courses, and also to alleviate some of the imposter syndrome I've had around changing my name to include not one, but two musical concepts. Happy Pride Month, everyone. I quickly realised that there was some bad news. Being a percussionist, my melodic skills were not spectacular. Everyone seemed so much more competent than me, and I was just sitting there, barely being able to count past the number 4. Fortunately, there was some good news. The assessment for one half of the course was mostly developing aural skills and presenting the way we accomplished it, so I have plenty to talk about. Specifically, I determined that actually recognising the different notes that were being played would be a good first step. So my goal over the last 4 months has been to do exactly that, by practicing more accurately identifying the intervals between any two given notes. This led to the realization that notes all sound the same when they're played together in a way I'm not expecting. I was told I was having trouble with something called chord inversions, which I think people just made up to mess with me, but that's what we'll be talking about for the next 5 minutes. So, here we go. So to start, a chord is just any group of notes which sound like they're being played at the same time. Pretty simple. In Western music, chords are typically composed of a root note called the tonic, and the notes 1/3 and 1/5 above that. Typically, the fifth will be a perfect fifth, which is called that because of some scary maths, and the third will either be a major third or a minor third, depending on if you want to be included in the Sad Vibes Spotify playlist or not. These three notes together are called a triad, and triads will be the basis of the rest of this video. Chord inversions themselves are actually quite simple. When I said that the root note was called the tonic, that was a lie. What you just heard was a C major triad with a C, in this case the tonic, as the lowest note in the chord, called the root note. In practice, any of the three notes can be the root note, which is precisely what a chord inversion is. In this case, where C is the lowest note, the triad is considered to be in root position. If the first note above the tonic, in this case E, is the root note, then the chord is in first inversion. If the second note above the tonic, G, is the root note, then the chord is in second inversion. But Melody, I hear you ask, what about inversions are you actually struggling with? Aren't you supposed to have developed an aural skills exercise to help you practice? Isn't this video supposed to explain that exercise? Why are you spending this time not doing that? Well, dear listener, to answer the latter 3 questions, yes, I did, and yes, I am. I developed a practice technique that involved rolling dice like the shiny math drop gremlin that I am, and using the numbers to represent an interval to sing or otherwise identify. The problem with that exercise, and any other exercise I could come up with alone, is that it doesn't work well on a video medium. It doesn't really help me better identify intervals in practice, and would just be boring to talk about and listen to for 5 minutes. Instead, I'm spending the time justifying why interval training is useful to chord identification, something I struggle with, and hoping that a somewhat interesting video will make up for a practice technique that, spoiler alert for the end of the video, boils down to using an ear training app and listening to music. So what exactly about chord inversions is difficult for me? Well, to understand that, we need to talk about the types of diatonic triads. You're familiar with the major triad already, but if the third is a minor, as was mentioned earlier, then you get a minor triad. I glossed over the alternatives for the fifth of the triad earlier for 2 reasons, and those reasons are diminished and augmented fifths respectively. Much like the minor third is 1 semitone lower than the major third, the diminished fifth is 1 semitone lower than the perfect fifth. The augmented fifth is likewise 1 semitone higher. When combined with respective minor and major thirds, they result in either a diminished triad or an augmented triad. Okay, glad that's explained. Each type of triad has a very distinct sound. However, I find that the distinction becomes incredibly difficult to spot if chord inversions are involved. Each of these triads are noticeable because of key intervals that make them sound like they do. The major triad is distinct because of its major third, and the minor triad due to its minor third. Although the augmented and diminished chords share these thirds, they are more distinguished by the augmented fifth and diminished fifth respectively, so it normally isn't a problem. When chord inversions are introduced, these distinct intervals are often harder to determine. A major triad comprised of a major third followed by a minor third suddenly becomes a minor third followed by a perfect fourth in a first inversion. The minor chord is the same but with a major third. Diminished chords change from 2 minor thirds to a minor third and a diminished fifth, and augmented chords change from 2 major thirds to 2 major thirds. Yeah, the point sort of falls apart there. That was a lot of information at once, and it probably sounded pretty similar. You might have picked up that the first inversion of a major tonic starts with a minor third, the exact defining characteristic of the minor tonic. The same behaviour happens with the inverted minor tonics, starting with the major third, and very quickly it becomes apparent what the confusion can be. The augmented triads are even stranger, in that the intervals they're comprised of don't change. Listen to the following different augmented chords and see if you can spot the difference. The starting chord I just played was the first inversion of a C augmented chord, based in the same key as every other example that has been played throughout this video. The second was an E augmented chord in root position. The keen-eared amongst you might have realised that they're identical in all but name and context, and that hits the core reason I've been having so much trouble with chord inversions. Without the context of a piece of music around them, chord inversions may as well be anything. It was this realisation that drastically changed the way I approached my practice. I started more diligently using ear training apps like Earmaster, and I began focusing more on listening to songs I was already familiar with, intending on understanding and internalising the chords and any inversions that they were comprised of. Although my own aural exercise was interesting, there have been decades spent on aural skills training by professionals far more qualified than I am, so I don't feel too bad about using more established methods. I still believe the core idea of interval training is necessary to identify chords more accurately, especially when seventh chords and extensions become involved. But the methods I have developed to accomplish that have become more in line with standard practices as the semester has gone on. I've learned a lot over the last 4 months, and I've set myself up for much more efficient learning in the future. With the number of unforeseeable setbacks I had in my work this year so far, I can happily say I'm proud of what I've achieved, and I'm looking forward to what comes next.